Joining us today over a coffee, Jamie Brannan, President of Operations for Zoetis, a global leader in animal health. We're talking about the future of pet care and of livestock welfare as well, and what this means for Europe's Green Deal. Jamie Brannan, thanks for joining us today. Full disclosure, first of all, do you have a pet?
Great to be here, Brian. Yes, I do have a pet. We have a family dog. So we have a 11-year-old, 36-kilo Rottweiler Labrador cross called Rocco.
I feel safer doing this at a distance, given the dimensions of your dog you just outlined. Also, credit to you for not just getting a lockdown dog as well. So you have a bit more scope in this. All my family all got dogs during lockdown. I resisted. My kids resent me for it. We're not giving in just yet. Let me just ask you, in terms of dog ownership today, you've had your dog for 11 years. And you have kids, the family dynamic of all that. What does it mean to have a dog? How much care does a pet require? What kind of maintenance does it involve?
It's a really good question. I think there is maintenance. And I think it's a much bigger decision than a lot of people think. And I would always urge people to really research and think about the commitments of owning a pet, not just a dog. But you've got to think about a number of considerations. Do you have the space? Are you able to exercise? The nutritional perspective as well. And that's before you even think about healthcare, medicalization. I would really urge people to research, even talk to a vet, and to make sure it's right for your family before you take on the commitment. That said, when you do, not wanting to convince you, Brian, for you and your family, but it's hugely rewarding.
That's interesting, because I think one of the questions I would have had is, what's the structure of play here? What are the dynamics at play, which in terms of not just our emotions, but the scientific approach to mental health. Yesterday, for example, a friend, she runs a big marketing company in London. She posted a picture of her dog in the office as well. And she said, look, this is a hard start to the year, but here is my little friend. And she explained just basically, for no other reason than the fact that he is quiet company in the office, it gave her an emotional boost. And in terms of global dynamics of pet ownership as well, what do you see in the marketplace as well? Are there any changes in terms of how the sector is performing as a consequence? Maybe not just because of COVID, but people's perception and adoption of animals into their homes and into their family life.
Yeah, so I mean, the market is very positive in terms of pet ownership, companionship is globally on the increase, and we've seen a significant uptick during COVID-19 as people have spent more time at home and have that need for companionship. But even if you look at as a global population, we're aging, and that companionship for the elderly was also incredibly important. That said, when you look at the demographics of ownership, millennials and Gen Z now lead the way in terms of pet ownership. And with that, we're seeing a greater level of humanization of pets. There's a more...
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by humanization of pets?
So humanization, so they're becoming more and more part of the family. So one way I would explain it, if you look at dog ownership through sort of the decades, the dog sort of went from the yard to the kitchen to the living room onto the sofa and now into the bed. And they're more and more being part of that family environment. And with that, people are looking at standards of care. They're looking at medicalization. They're noticing more. They're researching more. I think that research is leading to a better bond with veterinarians about how they want to care for their animals. And with that, you're starting to see growth in different parts of the sector. So medicalization and the right preventative medicine, the right treatments are of course important. Diagnosis as well is growing. But then if you look at more new spaces around sort of remote monitoring, or as we would call them, Fitbits.
And in terms of global markets as well, what's most attractive to Zoetis as a company as well? Where does your focus lie right now?
So we still, if you look at Zoetis as a business, global reach, but very balanced in our focus between both the pet care business and also the livestock industry. We are now slightly bigger in pet care, but it's also very much geographically focused on what's important. And obviously the need for animal protein is as important as it was.
Okay, and also in terms of the quality of what we consume as humans, the livestock health is now plastered on the packaging when we go to buy something in the store as well. The quality of the care of the environment and the rearing of livestock to be able to produce a healthy product for human consumption as well. Has that changed your market as well? Have you seen the demand, consumer-driven demand, change how farmers raising livestock have changed their approach?
Yes, definitely. And if you think at a macro level, farmers need to do more with less, and they need to be more sustainable in their approach. And with that, they need to think differently. And as we think about the need for antibiotics, we need antibiotics to treat sick animals, and we need to make sure we're looking after the welfare of animals. But we also need to understand that, in terms of antibiotic-free, or the need to keep hold of antibiotics and to prevent antibiotic resistance, that farmers need to think differently and vets need to support them differently to enable us to produce in a sustainable manner. And with that, there's a much bigger focus on preventative medicine. Prevention is always better than cure. So making sure we have the right management of livestock to reduce the need for therapeutic treatment.
Yeah, I think in the European Union, we talk about the One Health approach as well, which is applied to human health, but also to animal health too. And the toolbox of care for livestock in particular, and Zoetis has developed, I think, what you call the Continuum of Care. What's that about?
It's a great question. I think it goes back to what we were just talking about, Brian, in terms of how is the best way to manage both livestock and, to a certain extent, how you can manage pet care, and looking across a 4-part connected program in terms of prediction, prevention, detection, and then treat. So at a very early stage, if you're able to predict disease prevalence and manage it through a prediction and through genomic modeling, is a good start. You would then move on to prevention. So how do you use interventions or products to prevent disease? So vaccines are a great example of how you can prevent disease. And alongside that, in terms of looking at the sort of diagnostic pathway, so how are you using perhaps traditional diagnostics or data in terms of surveillance data to understand if there's going to be a disease or a disease prevalence, and then if needed, then the use of therapeutics to treat disease when necessary, which may be antibiotics or maybe other products. And I think it's using that continuum of care that enables much better management of livestock predominantly, but when you talk about pet care as well, you're also thinking about that preventative medicine. There's a lot of diagnostics involved and treatment when necessary.
Excellent. And what does Zoetis do in that market in terms of practical solutions as well? Are you involved in the research or the distribution or the whole healthcare approach for livestock and pets?
We're pretty much involved in all of it. I would say, innovation is key to us. We disproportionately invest in innovating, but that would be innovating across the continuum of care. So if you took an example in prediction, we have a genomics testing option called Clarified and Clarified Plus, which is nothing to do with genetic modification. So this is, again, it's really about diagnosis, and it's using DNA marker technology. So taking samples from dairy cows to look for prevalence of disease, things like mastitis or metritis, and also to look into productivity. And so by looking at the genomic makeup of replacement cows to go into a dairy herd, you can start to look at those which would have the best profile for productivity in terms of milk yield or in terms of prevalence of disease. And through working through that, you can support the farmer to make sure they're replacing the herd to have the most resilient herd possible. So I think that's a good example where we invest in less traditional in terms of, we were continually looking to invest in new vaccines. We're continually looking at new therapeutics, but we also invest heavily in areas such as digital diagnostics and how we can best use data.
Okay, interesting touch on digital there as well, because the European Union's approach to the Green Deal is digital and green, and the use of innovation and not an over-reliance on traditional farming techniques to drive forward this agenda as well. So in terms of the sustainability approach and the European Green Deal, how does this tie in with what Zoetis is doing in terms of its market profile, its work with farmers, and its innovation with livestock?
Yeah, I'd probably pick up on two areas from the Green Deal. One would be around the drive to reduce global greenhouse gases. I don't want to make it sound too basic, but healthier animals are gonna support that drive and initiative. They're gonna you're going to be able to be more efficient with those animals. You're going to have less disease incidents, and better animals treated well, cared for, are going to be more productive. So very simply, that supports the reduction of emissions. The other area we talked about antibiotics, and I'd link back to this piece in terms of the drive to reduce antibiotic sales by 50% by the year 2030. And again, that focus on a continuum of care, particularly with preventative medicine. So getting the right vaccine programs in place will ensure that you're reducing the disease incidence. And we talked about the genomics testing as well, again, can reduce the disease incidence. And this prevents the need for overuse of antibiotics, and making sure that we can keep antibiotics for when we need them to treat sick animals, but also to make sure we reduce any or try to limit the amount of antibiotic resistance we see.
Okay, and just in terms of what Zoetis as a company can expect or aims to do in the next decade or so as well, I think 2020 revenue was about $6.7 billion. And I would expect that to increase for 2021 as well. So it's a massive company. It's a global company. You have a sense of what's happening in each of the global markets as well. What excites you about Zoetis and its future in terms of pet care and livestock?
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's an exciting time for our industry. If we talk about pets first, so we said we've seen a bit of a pet boom at the moment. Some of that's come from COVID, but some of that has come from just the globalization of the pet market. I think it's going to be exciting times ahead as people continue to focus in on the health management of their pets. How do we continue to innovate in that space, whether that's through therapeutics, whether that's through digital options for pet owners and also for the vets to better manage their caseload and to also help the vets to manage their pet owners. So I think there's huge opportunities for us, whether that's in that digital space, but also in that therapeutic space and also from a diagnostics perspective as well. So as we start to, as the demands from pet owners become deeper, how do we support them? But how do we support the vet to answer their questions in the quickest time possible to build that bond between the pet owner and the vet? I think from a livestock perspective, there's going to be a need for more animal protein. As we have a growing population, as we see more westernization, the want for animal protein is there. I think we need to look at how we are able to manage the different types of protein. So there's a lot of challenges in the livestock space at the moment. If we look at what's happening with climate, if we look at what's happening with disease prevalence in things such as African swine fever or avian flu, how do we support farmers and processors through these times? And I think it's about us continuing to innovate, but also thinking about how we can support in diagnostics and also bigger data solutions and how we can support farmers to better use data to work on outcomes and to drive productivity.
It would seem to me that if we've learned anything from COVID is that the speed of reaction to disease management is critical. Having the right data is critical, and having big players involved in that is also essential now as well because of the logistics of delivering solutions as well. When you look at what Zoetis is capable of and other partners as well, in terms of your relationships with governments globally, do you see that your relationship with government is critical to how we manage animal disease and welfare and how you respond? You mentioned the direct relationship with veterinarians as well. Is that relationship changing as a consequence of what you've seen over the last couple of years? Is the urgency there to work more closely?
I think there's always been a good relationship with governments. I think we could work closer together as we look to specifically support farmers in terms of, that there are political initiatives around, if you look at climate change and what we need to do. And I think we could work closer to support farmers with, whether it's grants or investment and how we can work through those channels. I think in terms of the innovation pathway and how we bring products to market, I think that works incredibly well. But I think we can always look at how do we keep close and how do we make it more efficient and how are we able to get new innovation to the market as safely as possible, but in as quickly as possible. And I think, if you look at human health and the COVID-19 vaccines and the speed to market there to get us out of this situation, I think was a great case study for us all to think about how do we go through these pathways in the future. But for me, it's about dialogue. It's about making sure that we've got the innovation right, we've got the right conversations with government, and we're also able to look at how we move these things globally as well. As we see, diseases don't know borders, right? So how do we make sure that we can get the right products into the right markets at the right time? And I think that's good conversations with government really helps that.
Excellent. Jamie Brannan, thanks so much. Our regards to Rocco as well. Thanks so much for joining us over a coffee today.
Pleasure.